What would you do if the man who promised to love you for life suddenly decided you were disposable? If after years of sacrifice he tried to throw you away like you were nothing, believing you'd crawl away broken, with nothing left to your name? That's exactly what my husband thought when he pushed me toward divorce. He believed money, power, and a younger woman would shield him from consequences. But what he didn't know was that I had been silent for a reason. And when the truth came out, it wasn't me who was left empty. It was him. This is the story of how my husband's betrayal turned into his greatest regret and my ultimate revenge. When I married my husband, I believed I had found the man who would stand beside me until the end of my days. I wasn't naive. I knew marriage wasn't always perfect, but I believed in love, loyalty, and building a life together. For years, I gave him everything I had. My time, my energy, my youth. I worked alongside him, managed the house, raised our children, and kept our world spinning while he pursued his dreams. At first, he seemed grateful. He used to tell me, "I couldn't do this without you." I believed him. I held on to those words during the long nights when he worked late, and I stayed home, making sure our kids had someone to lean on. I thought we were partners, equals. But slowly, something shifted. I began to notice the way he looked at me, less like a woman he admired, more like someone who owed him. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped noticing when I dressed up or when I worked tirelessly to keep our home warm and welcoming. To him, I became background noise, always there, but never seen. The first real crack in our marriage appeared the day I overheard him on the phone. His voice was low but sharp, tinged with an excitement I hadn't heard directed at me in years. I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding as I caught fragments of his words. "She doesn't suspect a thing. Once this is done, I'll be free." At first, I thought maybe he was talking about business. My husband was ambitious, always chasing bigger deals, always hungry for more. But then I saw the way he guarded his phone when I entered the room, the way he smiled at messages when he thought I wasn't looking. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I wanted to trust him. After all, we had built decades together. But deep down, a storm was already brewing. And then, the divorce papers came. He didn't even have the decency to sit me down and speak to me like a human being. Instead, he slid the papers across the table as though I were an employee being dismissed. His tone was cold, detached. "It's better this way," he said. "You'll be fine." Fine? After everything I had given him? After the years I spent sacrificing myself so he could climb his ladder of success? My hands trembled as I held the papers, my stomach twisting in disbelief. He wanted me gone. He wanted me erased. But that wasn't even the worst part. He tried to strip me of everything. The house, the savings, even the little jewelry my mother had left me. He wanted it all. He had crafted the divorce settlement in such a way that I would walk away with almost nothing, left to rebuild my life from ashes while he strutted forward with his new prize. Because yes, there was another woman. Younger, prettier, someone he thought would make him look powerful and desirable. He paraded her around before the ink on the papers was even dry, like he had been waiting for this moment all along. He thought I was broken. He thought I would crumble, humiliated and defeated. But what he didn't know was that I was stronger than he ever imagined. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I didn't throw things or scream at him for betraying me. I signed those papers with a quiet hand, my face calm, my lips pressed into a faint smile, because silence is the sharpest weapon of all. While he believed I was powerless, I was already gathering my strength. While he celebrated his supposed victory, I was quietly watching, listening, collecting. He had spent years underestimating me, treating me as invisible, and that was his greatest mistake. I looked at him across the table as I slid the signed papers back, and for the first time, he noticed something he hadn't in years. My eyes weren't filled with sorrow. They weren't filled with defeat. They were calm, steady, almost dangerous. That was the moment I knew. He thought divorce would leave me with nothing. But in reality, it was the beginning of his undoing. Time became my greatest ally. Every day I watched him dig himself deeper into arrogance. He flaunted his wealth, boasted about his younger mistress, and smirked every time he passed me in court, thinking I was crumbling. But behind closed doors, I was building. I had gathered enough evidence to ruin him, not just as a husband, but as a businessman, as a man of reputation, as someone who prided himself on control. Still, I couldn't move too fast. Revenge, I realized, is like a fine wine. It needs patience to mature into something unforgettable. So I planned carefully. The first step was simple. Let his own greed expose him. I knew he would never stop showing off. The expensive cars, the lavish trips, the gifts to his new woman, it was all too loud, too noticeable. So I made sure the right people noticed. Quietly, I passed along little breadcrumbs to contacts I had built over the years. A whispered word to an old accountant. A subtle nudge to a tax officer. Nothing that could be traced back to me. The storm began to brew, and he didn't even see it coming. Meanwhile, I stayed invisible. I played the part of the broken ex-wife perfectly. Silent, pitiful, unimportant. He thought I was too defeated to matter. He thought I was just a shadow of his past, someone to pity at best, someone irrelevant at worst. But in truth, I was holding the matches while he soaked himself in gasoline. The second step was more personal. His mistress, the woman he thought was his trophy. I had no interest in confronting her, no need to humiliate her directly. Why waste my energy? Instead, I let her see the cracks in his perfect image. Not through words, but through carefully placed truths. An envelope mailed anonymously to her home, filled with documents proving he had debts he never mentioned. A photo slipped into her purse, showing him dining with yet another woman he had lied about. Slowly, I planted seeds of doubt. And those seeds grew into questions, arguments, and eventually mistrust. He thought he had replaced me with someone more obedient, someone who would never challenge him. But when her suspicion turned to anger, he began to feel the walls closing in. The final step was the masterpiece. Remember those documents I found? Contracts. Shady deals, money hidden in offshore accounts? I compiled them into a neat little package. And instead of handing them to him directly, I delivered them where they would hurt him most. To his business partners, to his investors, to the people who valued trust and reputation above all else. The fallout was immediate. Meetings were canceled. Deals collapsed overnight. His once loyal partners began questioning him, pulling out of projects, demanding explanations he couldn't give without admitting the truth. I stayed silent. Always silent. From the outside, it looked like I had nothing to do with it. To him, it must have felt like the world itself was turning against him, and the beauty of it all. He had no idea the woman he once underestimated, the wife he cast aside like a broken toy, was the very hand pushing every domino. I remember the day I saw him in public after the rumors spread. He looked tired. Not the proud, arrogant man who had smirked at me months ago. His suit was wrinkled, his smile forced, his mistress nowhere to be seen. People whispered around him, avoided his gaze. For the first time, he looked small, and I stood there, calm, almost serene. Because I knew this was only the beginning. He thought divorce would leave me with nothing. But little by little, I was taking away everything he had built. His money, his reputation, his pride, and soon I would take the last thing he clung to, his illusion of control. The days following the divorce papers felt like walking through fog. People expected me to collapse, to cry endlessly, to beg him for mercy. Even my closest friends whispered, "How will she survive?" But I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Instead, I played my role perfectly. I let him think he had won. I let him believe I was too weak to fight back. To him, I was just a discarded wife. Too old, too tired, too dependent to start again. And that was exactly what I wanted him to believe. But while he was basking in his supposed freedom, I started to peel back the layers of his lies. And what I found was worse than I had ever imagined. One evening, while he was out flaunting his new love at some fancy restaurant, I sat at home, going through old files and documents. I had never paid much attention to his business dealings before. I trusted him completely. But as I flipped through papers, bank statements, and property deeds, a strange pattern began to emerge. Properties I never knew we owned. Accounts under different names. Transfers of large sums of money that had no explanation. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then the truth struck me like ice. He hadn't just betrayed me with another woman. He had been hiding his fortune. All those years when he told me we couldn't afford vacations, when he made me feel guilty for buying a new dress, when he insisted that we live within our means, he was lying. He had been hoarding wealth behind my back, preparing his escape long before he ever handed me those papers. I felt a fire ignite in my chest. It wasn't just anger, it was insult. He had stolen years of my life, drained my energy, my loyalty, my love. And in return, he planned to leave me with crumbs, as if I were some nuisance he had finally shaken off. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't just a loyal wife. I had been beside him through every step of his rise. I knew how he thought, how he operated, how he hid his tracks, and that meant I knew exactly where to look. Quietly, I started collecting. Not things you could see in plain sight. No, I went deeper. I dug through emails, old messages, business contracts. I spoke to people he had long forgotten, old colleagues who still owed me small favors. Piece by piece, the picture became clearer. And what a picture it was. Not only had he hidden money, he had built his empire on secrets that could ruin him if they ever came to light. Deals made under the table. Tax shortcuts that weren't shortcuts at all, but crimes waiting to be exposed. And the best part? His arrogance made him sloppy. He never thought I would notice. I remember one night, sitting at the kitchen table with all the documents spread before me. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from anticipation. For the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I didn't feel invisible. I felt dangerous. That's when I made my decision. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't scream or demand answers. No, that would give him too much satisfaction. He thrived on power, and I refused to give him that stage. Instead, I would wait. Patiently. Quietly. I would let him walk into the trap of his own making, never suspecting that the woman he thought was weak had become the very person holding his future in her hands. My silence became my armor. My calm smile became my weapon. Every time he paraded that younger woman in front of me, every time he mocked me with his new life, I said nothing. I let him laugh. I let him gloat. Because little did he know, the foundation he stood on was already crumbling. And when the time was right, when his pride was at its highest, when he believed he had everything, that was when I would strike. He thought he had left me with nothing. But soon he would realize. I had taken everything. The cracks in his empire widened faster than he could patch them. His phone calls went unanswered. Investors pulled out. His mistress abandoned him, realizing the luxury she enjoyed was about to collapse like a house of cards. And yet, even as everything slipped from his grasp, he still clung to arrogance. He still believed he could rebuild, that somehow the world owed him another chance. But the world doesn't reward liars. The final piece of the puzzle came sooner than I expected. A letter arrived at my door, not addressed to me but mistakenly delivered from his lawyer's office. Inside, I saw the desperate measures he was trying to take. He wanted to liquidate what remained, hide funds under new accounts, and disappear overseas. For a moment, I almost laughed. The same man who once mocked me for being too naive was now running like a frightened child. I knew what I had to do. I gathered every last piece of evidence I had, contracts, bank transfers, tax fraud documents, and handed them over to the authorities. Not with fanfare, not with drama. Just silence. A neat envelope slipped into the right hands. Days later, his name was everywhere. Not in glowing headlines, not in powerful circles, but in disgrace. Millionaire businessman under investigation. Assets frozen amid fraud allegations. His accounts were seized. His properties locked down. The cars, the vacations, the mansions, all gone in the blink of an eye, and when he showed up at court trying to save what little he had left, he finally saw me. I didn't scream. I didn't gloat. I didn't even speak. I just stood there, calm, unshaken, with a faint smile that told him everything he needed to know. He realized then, every downfall, every whisper, every loss had been orchestrated by the very woman he cast aside. The woman he thought would crumble. The woman he thought was powerless. I didn't take revenge with fire or fury. I didn't need to shout or fight. My silence had been louder than any scream could ever be, and in that silence he was left with nothing. No fortune. No reputation. No adoration. No pride, just regret. He thought divorce would leave me with nothing, but in the end, it left him with nothing but the memory of the woman he underestimated, and the realization that the coldest revenge comes not with anger, but with silence.